Hi, in this tutorial, we're going to continue where we left off with our base flange and tab feature, and I'm going to show you how to use the edge flange feature. So let's come up here to the top to select edge flange, and when edge flange is selected, the first thing you're going to notice is there's a window here to select an edge. You're also going to see that there's a checkbox here for default radius. So I can change the default radius that I want this feature to be. And there's also going to be a gap distance here that we can alter if we'd like. Now, for right now, unless you uncheck this box, these two features are closed and they can't be edited. So with that being said, let's click on an edge. And when we select an edge, you're going to see that a flange propagates. And so this flange can either be in the position of being bent outside under our flange position tab. It could be outside, it could be inside, which brings the center of the material to the inside. So now you can see that the inside of the material is lined up with the outside of our first edge that we selected. And now you can also click on material inside, which brings the whole thing inside of this edge. And so you can see that the different ones you select are going to position it accordingly. Now, oftentimes when you're dealing with sheet metal, you're going to be using the first one, material inside. And the reason is because if I wanted to dimension this, all I would have to do is dimension the edge, knowing that the wall is going to be on the inside and the thickness is going to be on the inside of the part accordingly. I can also change the bend length and the bend direction. So right now I have it set at 32 millimeters. I could bump this up if I want. And I can also change the virtual sharp. So this kind of alters the way that the dimension is actually placed. You can choose to set your dimension to be the length of the flat, which is in this case the inner virtual sharp, or you can set it to be from the bottom of the propagation of the flange. You can also set it to be from the tangent, from the curve. So these are just different ways of dimensioning, but oftentimes I find it useful to just use the first feature the same way that we did in the flange position, to use outer virtual sharp. To me at least, it's the most intuitive because you're measuring from the bottom of the edge. So if I come up here and change the angle, you're going to see that the flange length does not change, which is good because that would become very confusing. The angle, it just alters how the material is going to propagate. And so you can see that the more you change the angle, the more it's going to move inward. And that's a positional thing. So I can alter this, and you can see that if I set it to the outside, it's going to snap to the base here. And this is a type of thing that you just have to play around with to get a hang of. It could definitely be confusing at first. I know I was confused when I first started looking at all these different features and ways to dimension. If you're just doing a 90-degree angle, it's often very simple. You're just worried about a few different parameters, and those parameters aren't changing much. So I'm going to set this to be, like I mentioned, inside, and I'm going to use the default radius. If I want, I can come up here and change it to a different radius, and you're going to see that that affects the material. I could set this to 3, and you can see that it gets smaller. I could set this to be 9, and that's going to change it. Working in sheet metal, you're often using the same radius, but things can change depending on the type of radius you want in a particular flange. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this to be default, and I'm going to come down here to flange position, and I'm going to click on offset. And offset is its own little feature. I can click on this dimension and move out my flange. So basically kind of creating a tab the way that we did in the last video, except I'm doing it all in the edge flange feature. So I could set this to be opposite. I can make this larger, smaller, or I could just turn it off. And when I hit OK, you're going to see that our material that was sticking out is now gone. It's been taken over and replaced by this radius. Furthermore, you see that there's this cut in the material. Now if I go back to my edge flange, you can see that my custom relief type is obround. If I change this to rectangular, you're going to see that it changes accordingly. So that's what obround looks like, this is what rectangle looks like, and this is what tear looks like. And so these three custom reliefs are very useful because the part wouldn't be manufactured if I wasn't able to select this in the way I wanted to. So I'm going to hit OK. And those are the basics of the edge flange tool. If we come over here to edge flange 1 in our feature manager tree and we click on the plus sign, we'll see that there's a sketch 16 here. Now you may be thinking, I didn't create any sketch inside my edge flange to create the edge flange. Well, you're right, you did not create any sketch. Solidworks created a sketch based on the inputs you put into the edge flange feature. So let's click on sketch 16 and edit sketch to see what Solidworks has created. What Solidworks has done is it's created a rectangle that's the same dimension as the parameters that we've entered. So I can actually come and move this up or down and place it where I want. And when I go out of that sketch, it's going to rebuild based on that. So this is a really great way to pick and pull and move around your feature and kind of edit it in a way that you want it to be. I can also edit the sketch, and I can create a shape inside here. Let's make it a circle. I'm going to create a center line from this point to the center. And I'm going to make this line vertical. And I'm just going to set a dimension here on this circle to be 30 millimeters. And so from here, I've created a closed shape inside another closed shape. When I exit the sketch, it's going to rebuild with that hole. As long as you create closed sketches inside here, everything will work out the way it should be. Now let's say I go to this sketch and I want to create, see, a rectangle that extends it. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to trim some entities, this entity, this entity. I'm going to close this. I'm going to get rid of this line. I'm going to get rid of this line. And so what we have here is a closed shape now with my added rectangle. Now let's see what happens when I exit the sketch. You're going to see that it updates accordingly. So this is a really powerful feature. See, I can create a lot of different features and extra little add-ons all within my flange. And so seeing how that works, what we can do is we can create another edge flange. So I can come up here to edge flange feature, and I could select the current edge flange and create yet another one. And so now I've created another flange, and I can also click on it again and do the same thing and bend down. And you can see that I can continue to create these features. So, in addition to creating features and editing the sketch of my flange, I can go back to my first flange and edit the sketch. And before, we manipulated the distance of the height of the flange, but I can also edit the length if I want. So I can come over here and I can click on this point at the bottom, and if I detach the point from where it's sitting, I can move it, and you can see that now my flange is smaller than it was before. So you can see that my circle is kind of overlapping here. I need to make sure that that closed shape is within the bounds of the main sketch. So you can see that my flange is smaller. So I can move this in, I can move this out. So I'm just going to place it here, and we're going to exit the sketch. And you can see that it's updated accordingly. There's now this little bit of distance here between this point and this point. And if I go back to that sketch one more time, I can drag it out, but now I'm outside of the bounds of the original edge that we created. So you're going to see that that causes an error. And the reason is because you're not allowed to create a sketch outside the bounds of the first edge that you created. Our first edge is this one, highlighted in orange. We can't exceed that. As long as you're within that distance, it's going to create and generate it.